She walked up to my barn like she owned the whole valley, clipboard in one hand, legal threats in the other. But what she didn't know was this. The barn wasn't just a building. It was a legacy, a symbol of everything my family built with bare hands and stubborn pride. And when she tried to tear that down in the name of aesthetic guidelines, she didn't just pick a fight with me. She picked a fight with the entire community. And we were ready to remind her that respect doesn't come from a title or a charter. It comes from earning it. She walked up to my barn like she owned the entire horizon, clipboard in one hand, attitude in the other. Her lips pursed like she'd just bitten into a lemon. I was tightening the last hinge on the feed door when I heard the crunch of her heels on my gravel. I turned and wiped the sweat off my brow. I'd never seen her before, but I knew exactly who she was before she even opened her mouth. "This structure violates multiple HOA regulations," she said coldly, not even looking me in the eye. "You'll need to take it down immediately or face legal consequences." I leaned against the post, half amused, half annoyed. "And who exactly are you?" She raised the clipboard slightly. "Karen Hillstone, president of the Willowbrook HOA." I nodded slowly. "Well, Miss Hillstone, you might want to check your map. This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction, never has been." Her eyes narrowed. "That's not what our expansion plan says. We submitted the annexation paperwork 2 months ago. Your barn is in clear violation of neighborhood aesthetic standards and must be demolished." I almost laughed. The barn wasn't just some wooden structure tossed together over a weekend. It was the product of 2 years of sweat, cuts, and sleepless nights. I had built it board by board with my own hands. Timber from my late father's old mill, salvaged tools passed down from my grandfather, and help from my son during summer breaks. It wasn't just a barn. It was the beating heart of our land. "I already have the county sheriff's approval," I said calmly. "He's on his way over right now." Karen's mouth twitched like she didn't quite know how to process that. She glanced back at her Lexus parked outside the gate, then looked at me again like I was a stubborn weed in her perfectly trimmed garden. "This is not about you," she snapped. "It's about community standards, property values, uniformity. You can't just build whatever you want because it's your land." That's when I stepped forward and leveled my gaze. "Actually, Mom, I can." And I did. I motioned toward the fence. "Now kindly step off my property while we wait for the sheriff." She didn't move. Instead, she pulled out her phone and started filming. "This is for documentation," she said with a smug grin. "We'll see what the HOA board has to say when they review your illegal structure." I didn't flinch. I just crossed my arms and waited. 10 minutes later, Sheriff Daniels pulled up in his county cruiser. A tall man in his 50s with a weathered face and a handshake like a bear trap. I'd known him for years. He coached my kids' baseball team, ate at the diner where my wife worked weekends. He wasn't just the law. He was a neighbor who knew the truth. "Everything okay here?" he asked, stepping out. Karen practically leaped toward him. "This man has constructed a non-approved structure that violates code. It's hideous and—" Sheriff Daniels raised one hand. "Ma'am, this property is not under Willowbrook HOA jurisdiction. Never has been. I checked county zoning myself." Karen blinked. "But the expansion map. I saw the map. It's not approved. It's a proposal. And even if it were official, it doesn't retroactively apply to parcels outside the original charter. This land's been separate since 1983. He's got all his permits. It's legal." Her face turned white as chalk. "And if I may," Daniels added, "you're currently standing on private property without permission. That's called trespassing." Karen stepped back like she'd touched an electric fence. I watched her storm back to her Lexus without another word. Gravel spit out from under her tires as she peeled off. Sheriff Daniels looked over at me and smiled. "You weren't kidding. That red paint job really gets under their skin." I grinned. "Carter red. Same color my grandfather used in 1955. He chuckled. "Good choice. Let me know if she comes back." "She will," I said. And I was right. 3 days later she returned, but she wasn't alone. 3 days later, like clockwork, she came back. Only this time, she didn't come alone. 2 board members flanked her, both wearing matching navy blazers and uneasy smiles, like they were part of some suburban enforcement unit. They pulled up in a clean black SUV with an HOA decal slapped on the side door like it meant something beyond paper and politics. I was out back feeding the chickens when I heard their voices drifting over the fence. Calm, but clearly rehearsed. "We're not here to argue," one of them called out. "We just want to talk." I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked up to the front gate. Karen stood in the middle, arms folded, like a queen at court. "We understand there's been some tension," the other board member said. His name tag read James Barlow, HOA Secretary. "We'd like to clear the air." I leaned on the fence post. "I thought we already did that, with the sheriff." James chuckled nervously. "Sure, of course, but there are still some concerns. Visual consistency, for one. The barn's colour, for example." Karen cut in. "It's disruptive." I stared at her. "It's red," I said slowly. "The same red it's always been. My grandfather used that colour on his barn in 1955. It's Carter red. It's tradition." Karen's eye twitched. "It doesn't blend with the suburban aesthetic. That colour draws attention." "Good," I said. "Let it." James raised a hand, trying to play peacekeeper. "Look, no one's saying you have to tear it down, but maybe repainting it. Beige, soft grey. Something that complements the neighbourhood could really ease tensions." I looked past them at the rows of identical beige homes with their regulation fences, fake shutters, and personality-free facades. "You want me to make my barn look like your mailboxes?" Karen stepped forward, visibly annoyed. "We're just asking for some compromise. You say this barn means something to you. We're trying to meet you halfway." "No, you're trying to put a leash on something you don't control. And that barn?" I said, turning to glance at it proudly. "It's not just a building. It's a symbol of everything your HOA has tried to erase. History, independence, identity." Karen's lips parted, stunned. I walked back toward the house. "You've got no power here," I said over my shoulder. "Go back to your meetings." But they weren't done. 2 days later, a flyer showed up in every mailbox from here to the end of the subdivision. Front page, a picture of my barn, zoomed in, bad angle, clearly meant to look aggressive. The headline read, "Unapproved structures lowering property values. What you need to know." My wife found it first and brought it in folded in half, her hand trembling. "I can't believe they printed this," she said. "They're trying to turn the neighbourhood against us." I opened the flyer and read through the text. It was written like a warning. "Several properties on the outer perimeter of the HOA district have erected non-compliant structures. These buildings, such as the large red barn off Valley Road, may have a negative impact on overall property values." They were naming me, without naming me. Hoping the fear of falling real estate prices would make my neighbours pressure me into backing down. It almost worked. That evening, a neighbour I barely knew, Greg from 2 doors down, came by with a concerned look and a 6-pack of beer. "Hey man, I saw the flyer. Just wanted to say, I don't agree with it, but folks are talking, saying you're stirring things up." "I didn't stir anything," I said. "I built a barn. They're the ones spreading fear." Greg nodded, hesitating. "I believe you. But people around here, they like quiet. They like things to stay the same." I cracked a beer and looked him dead in the eye. "Change never starts quiet, Greg." A few days passed, and things only got worse. Someone threw eggs at the barn one night. My son found them the next morning, splattered across the siding like a warning. No one saw anything. No one confessed. Karen stayed quiet. But I knew. And I'd had enough. That night, I wrote up flyers, of my own, not in fear, but in truth. I scheduled a community meeting, not under the HOA, not at their clubhouse. I held it at my barn, and I invited everyone. The night before the meeting, I stayed up late sweeping the barn floor and setting out folding chairs. My son helped string up a few dim lights along the rafters, and my wife made a tray of her famous lemon bars, the kind she only baked for special occasions or Sunday church potlucks. This wasn't just about defending a building anymore. This was about reclaiming something bigger, the right to live without a clipboard breathing down your neck, the right to build something meaningful without getting buried in paperwork, and the right to stand tall in your own yard without feeling like you were being watched. By morning, cars had already started lining the gravel road. It was more than I expected. At least 30 people showed up, some in work boots and flannel, others in pressed polos with HOA newsletters still tucked under their arms. I stood on a crate in the corner of the barn and cleared my throat. Thank you all for coming. I didn't call this meeting to stir trouble. I called it because I think we've all had enough. Murmurs. You've seen the flyer, you've heard the rumors, so let me show you the truth. I held up a thick folder and set it on a table. Full county permits. Every form signed, stamped and filed. This barn was built legally with the county's blessing. Sheriff Daniels himself reviewed it. Right on cue, Sheriff Daniels stepped into the barn and nodded toward the crowd. Can confirm, he said, calm and clear. This property is not within HOA boundaries, and this barn is 100% compliant. People looked at each other. A few muttered. Others nodded. But this goes beyond zoning, I continued. This is about control. About a handful of people trying to shape a neighborhood in their image and punishing anyone who doesn't fit the mold. A hand went up. It was Marlene, an older woman who lived near the creek. I've lived here since before there even was. An HOA, she said. They told me my rose bushes were too wild, made me cut them back, said my shutters were too bright. Now they're coming for barns? Chuckles rolled through the crowd. She wasn't the only one. Greg, the beer guy from before, raised his voice next. They fined me last year because my mailbox was 2 inches taller than the HOA code. 2 inches! Mine too, someone else chimed in. They said my fence looked too rural. It's a fence. Sheriff Daniels stepped forward. We've received multiple complaints in the past 6 months that fall into a grey area. Not criminal, but bordering on harassment. Most of them trace back to one source. No one said her name, but we all knew it. Karen. Someone finally broke the silence. What can we do? That was the question. So I gave them an answer. In the days that followed, word spread like wildfire. The meeting at the barn had lit something, a fire people didn't even know they were carrying inside them. It started small. A petition circulated, calling for revisions to the HOA charter, demanding limits on overreach, and proposing an independent review board made up of actual residents, not just the hand-picked inner circle Karen controlled. Over a dozen people signed it within 24 hours. Then it was 30, then 50. By the weekend, nearly 70 homes had backed it. Karen must have felt the tide turning, because the next morning I woke up to find a new flyer in the mailbox. This one wasn't about barns. It was about me. A divisive force in our neighborhood. Is this the leadership we want? It had my name on it, my address. It twisted my words, claiming I was riling up resistance and encouraging non-compliance with HOA guidelines. It was a hit piece, a smear job. And it backfired. People were furious. Using personal information like that? She's gone too far, Marlene said, waving the flyer in the air at the corner store. Even residents who didn't love my barn started backing me. Not because they loved red paint, but because they hated feeling manipulated. Then came the moment that tipped everything. Sheriff Daniels received a complaint from Karen about dangerous crowd gatherings at my barn. He paid me a visit, not to warn me, but to support me. Thought you should know. She tried to report your community meeting as a public safety risk, he said, shaking his head. I told her it was a legal gathering, on private property, and if she kept making false claims, she'd be the one in legal trouble. We shared a quiet moment, leaning against the gate. It's not going to stop, I said. Daniels looked out across the fields. No, but you don't have to either. 2 nights later, the HOA board held their monthly meeting. Karen expected business as usual, a quiet room, her voice carrying the most weight. But the room was packed. Over 80 homeowners showed up, standing room only. They asked questions. They demanded transparency. They asked for copies of past complaint records. They asked for term limits. They asked why Karen had sole authority to approve or reject projects. And finally, someone asked the question we were all thinking, why are you so obsessed with tearing down one man's barn? Karen's composure cracked for the first time. It's not about the barn, she said. It's about keeping this community in order. No, someone said from the back. It's about control. And we're tired of it. Silence fell. Karen tried to move to the next topic, but it was too late. A vote was called, a motion to remove her from the board, pending an independent ethics review. It passed, by a landslide. Karen didn't speak. She gathered her papers, stood, and walked out of the room without looking back. And just like that, the clipboard lost its power. The quiet after the storm. The days after Karen stepped down felt strange. The HOA didn't implode. The streets didn't fall into chaos. Property values didn't plummet overnight. In fact, nothing really changed, except the weight that had been sitting on everyone's chest was suddenly gone. The clipboard was gone. The sneaky drive-by photos? Gone. The passive-aggressive notes about garbage bins being visible for more than 10 minutes? Gone. For the first time in years, folks around here were breathing again, actually talking again. The morning after the vote, I found 3 different neighbours at my gate, not to complain, not to demand, but to say thank you. Didn't realise how much we'd let it get to this, said Mr. Vega, an older man who had nearly sold his house the year before out of frustration. I used to love living here. Forgot what that felt like. I nodded, understanding him in a way I never had before. Control creeps in slow. You don't notice until it's already wrapped around your neck. He laughed, but his eyes were serious. You know what you did, right? You didn't just save that barn. You reminded us who we are. That hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time just fighting to keep what was mine, I hadn't realized how many people had lost what was theirs too. Their voice, their peace, their ability to hang a wind chime or grow sunflowers without getting a warning letter. And that's when I knew it couldn't end with Karen. It started small. A handwritten note tacked to the post by my mailbox. Community rights workshop, Saturday at the barn. Know your limits. Know theirs. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a politician. But I'd learned enough in the past 3 months to fill a binder with facts most homeowners had no clue about. I called Sheriff Daniels and asked if he'd speak. Gladly, he said. People need to know where HOA occurs. Ines actually stop. So we did it. That Saturday, 20 chairs weren't enough. Neighbours came carrying their own fold-out seats, lawn chairs, even a few tree stumps. We talked zoning laws, deed restrictions, what HOAs could and couldn't enforce, and how to organise peaceful resistance when needed. Daniels explained it in plain language. HOAs exist to manage shared spaces, not to govern private ones. If they try to control your tool shed, your porch chairs, or what colour you paint your mailbox, and your land isn't under their contract, they're bluffing. You could see the realization sink in for people. The anger, the relief. A woman named Cynthia raised her hand and shared that she'd been fined twice for growing corn in her backyard garden. They said it wasn't aesthetically consistent. I cried. I actually cried over corn. A man across the way stood up. I had to fight just to keep my backyard swing set. They said it looked too rural. I mean, it's a swing. Everyone laughed. But underneath it, the truth was painful. We'd been bullied, one by one, quietly, and no one had felt brave enough to stand. Until now. That summer, the barn took on a new life. It became more than just my workshop. It was a hub, a gathering place, a symbol. People dropped by just to talk, to vent, to ask questions. I started hosting monthly community circles, not HOA meetings, not government stuff, just real folks helping each other. Someone had a neighbor dispute. We worked it out together. Someone needed help with permits. We found the right channels. Someone just wanted to talk about losing their spouse and how the HOA had made them feel even more alone. We listened. It was healing. It was real. And I realized, all this time I thought the barn needed defending, but maybe it was the community that did. Karen had ruled with fear. Now we were rebuilding with trust. One evening, long after the last porch light had gone out, I walked out to the barn alone. I ran my fingers along the door, the grain of the wood still familiar, still rough. That barn, that stubborn, bright red symbol of independence, had done more than house my tools. It had brought a neighborhood back to life. I looked out at the fields, dusk settling soft over the hills, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just a win. This was a beginning. The fine print is where they hide the knives. It started with a letter. No flyer, no warning, just a plain white envelope tucked between the bills. I didn't even notice the name on the return address until I was halfway through opening it. Willowbrook Compliance Review Committee. I froze. The HOA didn't have a compliance review committee, not officially, not when Karen was still in power. So what was this? Inside was a single sheet of paper. As part of our charter review initiative, we are conducting a formal reassessment of boundary encroachments and grandfathered zoning agreements. Your structure, identified as a Type 3 detached agricultural utility building, may fall under provisional re-evaluation pending county verification. You are advised not to make any further alterations until this matter is settled. I read it twice, then a third time. It didn't say the barn was illegal, it didn't demand demolition, but it didn't have to. It was vague on purpose, written to sound official, to intimidate, to imply something without saying it outright. I looked at the signature at the bottom. James Barlow. He had been Karen's second-in-command, the guy who'd smiled through gritted teeth and asked me to repaint the barn just to blend in. I guess he wasn't done. I drove straight to the county clerk's office the next morning. Jessica, the clerk behind the desk, greeted me like an old friend. Back again, huh? Apparently I'm being re-evaluated, I said, handing over the letter. She skimmed it, then snorted. This isn't from us? I figured. But can they do this? Jessica shook her head. You're outside the official HOA district. Always have been. They can write all the scary letters they want. Doesn't make it real. But... She paused. There's a new zoning proposal in draft. It's been submitted to the county for expansion. Again, if it passes, your land would fall inside the new perimeter. That hit me like a brick. When? I asked. Next quarter. Could be sooner if they push it. I left the building with my fists clenched. They weren't giving up. Karen may have stepped down, but her cronies were still pulling strings. They'd lost the battle for power. So now they were going after process. The fine print. The back doors. The loopholes. That night I called another meeting. Not at the barn this time. At the old school gym because we needed the space. Over 100 people showed up. I held the letter high. This isn't about paint color anymore, I said. This is about annexation. Quiet, sneaky annexation. The same people who tried to tell you what flowers to plant now want your land under their thumb, whether you agreed to it or not. Gasps. Outrage. Whispers. Sheriff Daniels stood beside me and nodded. I've confirmed it, he said. They submitted the proposal 3 weeks ago. If it passes, everyone on the West End, including this barn, falls under their jurisdiction. Marlene stood up in the crowd. Can they do that without a vote? They can try, Daniel said, but it's not final yet. James Barlow showed up halfway through. He didn't speak, just stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. When the meeting ended, he approached me, alone. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be, he said, voice low. I stared him down. No, James, you are, because you don't understand what this barn means. He smirked. It's just a building. I stepped closer. It's a stand, a red line, and we're not backing down. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. 2 weeks later, the county held its quarterly zoning board session. I walked in with a stack of over 180 signed petitions. Dozens of residents showed up, wearing shirts that read, "Not just a barn." We spoke. We told our stories. We showed photos of the barn, not just as a structure, but as a gathering place, a center, a beacon. And then came my turn. I stood in front of the board and looked each one of them in the eye. I built that barn with my own hands, I said, but what it's become, what it stands for, is bigger than me. It's about neighbors helping each other, about resisting control disguised as order. It's about people, not politics. There was silence after I spoke, and then slow, scattered applause. The board deliberated for over an hour. When they returned, the chair read the decision out loud. Proposal for perimeter expansion denied. We'd won. Not just a reprieve, a full denial. James wasn't there. Neither was Karen. They didn't need to be. We had taken back more than a barn. We had taken back our story. It's been 6 months since the vote. The grass has grown high around the fence again. The red paint on the barn is sun-faded in places, the corners chipped from storms and wind. I'll get around to fixing it eventually, but I kind of like it that way. Worn, but still standing. People still drive by and slow down. Some wave, some stop just to say hi. The kids on their bikes call it the Rebel Barn, and even the ones who once whispered behind closed doors about how it ruined the view now use it as a landmark. Funny how things change. Not long ago, I stood alone in this fight. Just a man with a barn, a deed, and a sheriff who had his back. Now, I'm part of something bigger. We created something here. A community that knows how to say no when the rules stop making sense. A neighborhood that doesn't just follow, but questions, challenges, and reclaims its own voice. After the zoning proposal was denied, James Barlow quietly resigned. No speech, no apology, just an email and an empty seat on the board. Karen? Last I heard, she moved across the state. Sold her house to a young couple who built a chicken coop and strung solar lights around their porch. No one complained. And the HOA? Well, it still exists, but it's different now. Leaner, transparent. Its meetings are open, its budgets public, and its power limited by the very people it once tried to control. We made sure of that. I still host monthly workshops, not out of anger anymore, but out of hope. People come to learn, to share, to listen. One night, a teenager named Eli showed up with a spiral notebook full of sketches. Said he wanted to build a greenhouse in his backyard. But the HOA says it's an eyesore, he mumbled. I smiled and handed him a copy of the zoning laws. You build it right and they can't say a word. Let me help you do it right. His face lit up like a porch light, moments like, they're everything. This barn didn't just save my dignity. It saved other people's dreams, gave them a place to grow roots. And the funny thing is, I almost gave up. I almost painted it beige. I almost let the pressure win. But every nail I hammered, every board I lifted with shaking hands, I was building something deeper than wood. I was building freedom. Last week, my wife found something in an old box in the attic. It was a photo, black and white, curled at the edges, of my grandfather standing in front of his own red barn. Same color, same stance, same pride in his eyes. I held it for a long time. That barn isn't here anymore. Time took it, like it always does. But this one will outlive me. Because it doesn't just hold hay and tools. It holds stories, it holds legacy, it holds the memory of a man who said no when it mattered most. Sometimes I still hear Karen's voice in my head. That first day she marched up, clipboard in hand, telling me I had to tear it down or face consequences. And sometimes I think about all the ways that moment could have gone. If I'd backed down, if I'd stayed quiet, if I hadn't picked up the phone and called the sheriff, if I hadn't believed, even a little, that I deserved to stand my ground. But I did. And now, so does everyone else around here. That barn, it's not just mine anymore. It's ours. A bright red line that says loud and clear, we belong here, we matter, and we will not be erased.